Hey everyone, thank you for clicking on this video. I just want to tell you right now that I am just learning Streamlabs. I don't really know how to edit, and for some reason there's no pause button on this. So I'm going to do my best to present my material. There will be times where it sounds like I'm reading off of the presentation. That's because I am. It's long, but I think it'll be worth it if you check it out. Let me go ahead and read my officially written intro, and then we'll get started on the actual content. Thank you for your patience. I hope you like the video. Again, I am learning, so I appreciate it. Y'all take the content as the most important part, okay? So let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Man Closet. That's me. I'm Magi History. Thank you for clicking on my video. I realize the production value, like I said, may be wanting. I am new at using Streamlabs and learning new editing skills every day. I really wanted to wait to do this video when my skills are better, but I believe now is the time to share my thoughts on this topic. This video is quite thorough, but it is not intended to be detailed history or philosophy. The subject I speak on today encompasses millions of words, thousands of books, and billions of man hours to cover. It is meant to be an insight and call to action to those seeking a more perfect union or want to understand where someone like me gets their beliefs. As I said before, this video from a technical standpoint is very basic. And if you want to know more about the history or what I cover, please find the information yourself. I've learned a long time ago that the best form of opinion is one you form yourself, even if inspired by others. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and like and comment. Thank you. So we're going to be doing a lot of things. I'm more than just a social studies teacher. I'm more than just a guy, period. You know, I've worked all my life really hard, and I know a lot of subjects, a lot of business. I'm just a huge nerd. So I will be sharing other stuff. But this is my first political video, so we're going to get started. Thank you for your patience. All right, let's see here. We got to get my ugly face off of here. And I'm just going to read, okay? Western ideology in the United States of America. The foundational framework of laws in the United States are twofold. They are the federal and state constitutions. The United States of America Constitution is the federal framework of laws in the country, meaning no law in the country can go against the United States Constitution. Every state in the USA has an individual state constitution, meaning no local law in each state can go against that state constitution. Together, these constitutions are the basis, the framework of all laws in the country. No law can conflict with these two framework documents in each jurisdiction. This means different state constitutions can conflict, but they cannot conflict with the federal constitution. Why is this important, and how does that affect Americans? Well, let's start off with the preamble of the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, that's our future people, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Okay, there is a drawback between these constitutional legal frameworks. The main drawbacks of these frameworks are how we test the law or regulation constitutional worthiness. The laws and regulations must be challenged in the courts in order to be deemed constitutional or not. This means many laws may continue to exist that conflict with the rights of the governed until such time the court decides its merits. So basically, whenever they're creating a law, they're creating something they believe might be constitutional, but it assumes that it is constitutional until it is challenged not to be constitutional. So yeah, people can be abused by that. So the only way to really fix that is to make sure that something's bulletproof before even creating the law. But governments create laws that go against their frameworks all the time, but they have to be questioned. And that's what I mean by drawback. Access to the challenge. A person accused of performing a criminal act has a right to a speedy trial and representation. However, there is no guarantee of quality of representation. Such quality is often linked to the person's financial means. This is especially true in civil rights cases. People dealing with constitutional tort challenges are not guaranteed representation at all, because it's about money, not about being incarcerated. Last, judges in the United States were initially appointed at all levels. Today, in many municipalities, these jurists' positions are elected, meaning they are subject to bias and influence. So, generally, if a judge wants to run for a judgeship, then he's running for political office. And political office takes money, and that money, you know where that comes from. That's right. So he's going to have, or she's going to have, some influence by politicians or by political groups over what they should be, which is someone who is bulletproof from being that swayed by those elected officials. Intentions of the United States and state constitutions. The main intention in creating the United States and the state constitutions are to create the best ideological framework according to the classical liberalism, in hope for a humanistic utopia whilst still providing a social contract. Basically, this stuff is literally founded off of classical liberalism, which is something we'll talk about more, and the social contract. This was the idea of the United States being the perfect utopia for this humanistic ideas, or this classical liberalism is another way of calling it. During the initial years of ratification, these constitutions were more ideological than applied in fact. It would take much struggle for their ideological application to be fully realized. This is the point of constitutional amendments in the courts. In other words, you look at the Declaration of Independence, which we'll discuss later, and the federal constitution. They are all about idealism. Like I said, it's a framework. You're supposed to make a law that's supposed to go along with this ideology, and this ideology is a classical liberalism ideology that comes from humanism. Again, this is the whole point, right? So the fact that it's not perfect, it didn't start perfect, it's up to us to make it perfect. And that is the reason why we have constitutional amendments and we have the courts to decide whether something's constitutional or not. The founders of the country knew their ideals created the framework, though it would take work and fighting by those people immigrating by desire or by force to make these ideologies a true reality. So remember, in the preamble, it's basically saying that, yeah, we started this Constitution, but in perpetuity, we expect it to be fixed and made better by future generations, and to actually get to that humanistic utopia that they dreamed of. What is classical liberal ideology? Where does the ideas come from? The words of our preamble of the United States Constitution and Declaration of Independence tell us the origins of classical liberalism. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity. Posterity means the future. Do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America. We, the people, is meant to be all of those residing in the United States of America. Some people regard these words, the people, to mean white free men in the country. However, the political theorist where the ideology develops speaks of the whole body of civilization. These theorists I will introduce later in the video believe that the whole of humans were endowed with the rights to live free with liberty as long as there was a social contract of peace among the polis. The polis is a word from the Greek meaning the whole society. Therefore, the country was founded on the hope of eventual freedom of all American people. We know this because the Constitution, which has the ability to be added to by amendments, and the Declaration of Independence itself. And again, we'll go more into that a little bit later, but those who say it was just for white males don't understand the theories behind it. If they did, they wouldn't say that unless they're just lying to you. All right. Declaration of Independence and Classical Liberalism. The ideology of the country is clear in this part of the Declaration. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of God's nature entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impelled them to separate, the reasoning behind it, in other words, by theorists like Thomas Hobbes, George Hegel, and several others, is where this whole idea comes from, of not just mainly the social contract. And they're arguing the social contract in this part of the Declaration. John Locke and the Declaration of Independence. Many times in this video I will mention John Locke, an English philosopher. I do this because his words are essential to our Declaration of Independence, the essential document that declares why we separated from England in the first place. It also defined our intentions for creating our country. Though not as legal as our federal constitution today, it proceeded and declared what our determined beliefs are. Many contemporary humanists to John Locke believe that natural human rights and the social contract. However, it is John Locke who wrote these vaguely familiar words. He wrote, "The human rights consist of life, liberty, and property." Sound familiar? Of course, these three words, only one has changed in the Declaration of Independence. Locke's original was right to property. Why? Before the Constitution, there was the Articles of Confederation, and before that, the Declaration. The authors knew if they used the words right to property in the founding documents, future slave owners in the newly formed country would declare owning other people as a right of property, something that is fundamentally went against the core idea of a human right. Again, most people today that argue for the whole idea of just white people don't realize that this idea, even though it came from England, it's 1,000 years of thought. And human rights were supposed to encompass everybody. And that didn't change just because of their skin tone. Okay? Um, if you do some more research, you'll find, but I think I make a pretty good argument here. The Declaration of Independence and Classical Liberalism. This is an editorial, whatever. My best argument for this part of the passage is the country may not have been founded as a slaveholding country. However, slavery never meant to be a continuing institution. At the time of our founding, more countries in the world had legal slavery and indentured servitude. It was the humanistic and liberal ideal that a truly advanced society would do away with slavery as it had in most of Western Europe during the founding of the USA. Furthermore, as a country, legal slavery lasted 89 years, while segregation, Jim Crow, and legal discrimination of those defined as Americans of African descent lasted 99 years. This compared to thousands of years of enslavement all over the world, including Africa, and a thousand plus years of Muslim enslavement of non-Muslims. Chattel slavery, some believe to be more hideous than other forms of slavery. However, male slaves in Muslim lands were also castrated. They may have disagreed with most people who see chattel slavery as worse. I believe the reason Martin Luther King Jr. compared America to Israel as the promised land was the idea of transition between slavery and freedom. Not only because Israelites settled their homeland in peace, but it was God's promise that Israel was their land, though the Babylonians, Romans, and later Arab Muslims invaded and took that land away from the Jews. Meaning, just because the land is promised to you does not mean you do not have to fight for it. Dr. King, I believe, chose the verbiage as a Bible scholar, saying the promised land is for all Americans and it is up to us to work together to keep the ideals that were promised of this land constant and equal. In other words, we got to fight for it socially, not just assume it's going to be given to us. But at the same time, we got to make sure it's equal. He was looking for equal, not extra. Declaration of Independence and Classical Liberalism continued. Quote, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their power from the consent of the governed. That's the social contract. That wherever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, broken social contract, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That means government's for us, y'all. It's not for the rich. It's not for the politicians. It is for us. Every American has the right to call for reorganization or end of a current government by the majority. The majority has to want it, not just the minority. Okay? Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And according all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. In other words, people will take a lot before they finally say enough is enough. Let that sink in. Okay? In the last 30 years, I'm almost 50 years old. I will tell you that it does seem that governments and organizations are out just for themselves. And if you're going to work and benefit from the economy that you put in, you still have to benefit the people. If it's not benefiting the people, then there's no reason for it. That's the whole thought of the social contract, was it's a trade-off between the powerful and the majority. It is not just a human right, but the duty of all people to call for a new government if it has not served the people for a long time. That's what they're saying in that part of the Declaration of Independence. Historically, the writers refer to divine right of kings as tyrants and dictators to include empires that do not have the governed's best interest in mind. This concept comes from the social contract, an idea in order for a society to exist, people must give up certain liberties for the common good in exchange for governments that work for the common good within limits. Do you think our government institutions have the common good in mind? We're creating laws and regulations today? Quote, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity where constrains them to alter the form of system of government. Historically, content is the Declaration itself. This history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, less facts be submitted to a candid world. So in this part of the Declaration, they're saying, hey, this is what's been going on, and we got to put a stop to this, okay? The ideology of the country is clear. Quote, he has refused his assent to laws that most wholesome and necessary for public good. He has forbidden his government to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operations till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyranny only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. Basically, what happened is British Parliament was put all together in back rooms and basically forced into submission for what the king wanted, or the people who represented the king, even though they lived in a time of English government that where Parliament was technically in charge, just like it is today. King had influence, but not absolute power. I chose to leave out more of the Constitution and the amendments for the later editorialization. This part of the video is about classical liberal theory and historical context. As stated in our founding documents and frameworks, that there is not just philosophical context of the United States of America, but such philosophies have a historical context as well. What I mean is, it's more than just people thinking about the stuff. Most philosophies come from strife, just like most technologies. People are forced in a way to think about things to solve problems because of the problems they're going through. And we're going to talk about the historical context in just a moment. The historical context is for conceptual purposes only. I will not be going into complete historical detail. There are other videos for that. Okay. Western political philosophy. The Greeks, Plato and Aristotle, argued the ideological merits of the republic and democracy. Athenian democracy ultimately failed due to those who voted, the voters being the head of the Greek family. This person was the eldest male who had complete legal obligations and rights over his family. This meant he had absolute power and responsibility of and for them. This also meant he could be punished for their bad deeds. Therefore, he had the right to cast a vote because he represented his family as part of the polis, the people. It is in the case of the Athenian democracy, the voting majority would only vote for what benefited him and his family, not the overall good of the people. Eventually, this form of democracy became intolerable when men refused to pay for military and public works. If it were not for a general tricking these voters, Athens and the Greek world would have been lost to the Persians. Nearly the same time as the first Greek democracy was the founding of the Republic of Rome. Plato and Aristotle were aware of the Roman Republic. Plato used this republican idea to compare and contrast with democracy. He posited that positive and negatives of the republican style of government. The defining framework of a republic was shared power. The power of three co-equal branches: legislative, judicial, and executive. The Romans also believed in the legal concept of innocence until proven guilty in jury trials. So all of these things are coming from these guys, right? After the fall of Rome, the Roman Empire in the West, and the rise of the Eastern Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire in the East, Christianity flourished. Nearly 400 years after the beginning of the Christian Roman Empire, Islam rose to take over Central Asia, North Africa, and the Arabian and Iberian peninsulas. Iberian Peninsula being modern-day Spain and Portugal. While Islam spread east and encroached on the West, the Roman Catholic Church and newly converted Christian Celts, Vikings, and many tribes of Western Europe joined under the banner of religion over nation-states to fight a holy war against the rising Islamic threat. Oftentimes, the Crusades are referred to by modern liberal scholars as Christians threatening Muslims. However, before the rise of Islam, Christianity was becoming the dominant religion in the area now dominated by Islam. This is to include the dominating of Israel by Islam. The Crusades were an answer of two rising religious powers looking to dominate what is referred to as the Western world today. The term Western world basically excludes only Greater China and India's sphere of influence, since they were the only areas known to the West at the time. The West would also include Africa. After all, Mesopotamia is home to the recognized first Western civilization. Today, Mesopotamia is mostly the country of Iraq, and those people ended up taking over North Africa during the Arab during the time where Islam. But just remember, Africa is literally right below Europe. So it's in the west. It's not in the east. It's in the west. It is just below Europe. So when we talk about the Mediterranean Sea, we're talking about Africa. We're talking about mainland Europe. We're talking about the parts of Asia Minor. We're talking about Greece, okay, and Turkey. So, which is still part of Europe. So, Western world literally means everything known besides the sphere of influence in China, meaning those type of Asian countries, East Asian countries, and India. That's it. Okay. I bring up this conflict while studying political origins of political ideology because political ideology goes hand in hand with religious ideology, especially as to conflict in antiquity as it is today. In the Western world, there have been two major changes in the Christian religion and two major changes in Islam. These changes contributed to the biggest cultural and philosophical shift ever to affect the whole of humankind. In the West, religion shifted from polytheistic to monotheistic. Monotheistic started with the Jews, then Christians, then Islam. Jews are still waiting for their Messiah. However, Abraham was their most influential prophet. Christians' Messiah is Jesus. Islam claims both Abraham and Jesus as prophets, and Muhammad as the last and only true prophet. These beliefs all end with an interpretation that the same God needs three prophets to worship him. Because of this, people are willing to kill each other for thousands of years. These three religions center around one God. However, it was the interpretation of the will of God that defined a majority of world culture today. All of them are guilty of the spreading of empire and colonization. Jews had to colonize whatever country would take them in. Muslims conquered and colonized much of Africa and the Middle East. This is because Arabs were polytheistic Persians long before Muhammad. And their conversion to Islam, they overtook the lands of Persia, Africa, and the Asian steppes. They combined with Mongolia and even Eastern Europeans as well, thus creating a multi-ethnic Islamic Europe. Empire, excuse me. That's why I wrote everything down on these papers because I knew I couldn't write all this without pausing. And like I said, I don't. Streamlabs doesn't even have one, and I don't have the editing skills yet, so I apologize. So Christians first took Rome by conversion. When Rome fell, both Roman and Orthodox Catholics converted polytheistic tribes all over Europe, northeastern Asia, and the Americas. All of these events of religious conversion happened sometimes by force and sometimes by enslavement. Among these people include Africans, Asians, and Europeans alike. Today, in many countries, enslavement is still happening due to religious ideology. At the end of the Crusades, there was a period referred to as the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Age of Exploration. So periods I meant by that, by the way. During this time, there was a rise in political and religious philosophy. In the 14th and 15th centuries, Italy consisted of city-states. Some city-states were politically connected with others, and some ran directly by the papacy. Papal states, I mean, the Pope was the head of, and then Florence was a republic, and we've already discussed what a republic was. Many of the other city-states were duchies. During this time, a man named Nicola Machiavelli wrote a book called The Prince. It was this book that argued that in order for a ruler to maintain power, he must be willing to do whatever is necessary, regardless of morality. He believed the ultimate morality was to live with the devil you know, because the devil you don't know might be worse. His philosophy, in my opinion, has been the greatest poison on Western politics since its inception. It gives politicians permission to lie, subvert, propagandize, and go against their enemies and political opponents without guilt. After all, everyone thinks they are the good guy. Soon after Machiavelli in the timeline is the Protestant Reformation. A monk in Germany named Martin Luther provoked the Roman Pope of his time over indulgences. According to Roman Catholic Church, before the Protestant Reformation, you could buy forgiveness of sin because the Pope said so. This meant the wealthy could do whatever they wanted as long as they paid the church for forgiveness. What is even worse, the poor could also pay for forgiveness. Along with cash for forgiveness schemes, the German monk Martin Luther pointed out, since he could actually read the Bible in Latin, the only language in the Roman Catholic world you could get the book in, the only people who knew better worked for the Pope. So, of course, they're going to say, yeah, it's in the Bible. Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. Indulgences for sale. Okay, without getting even more in the weeds, Martin Luther translated the Roman Catholic Bible into German, and those who read it saw for themselves what the book actually said. The Reformation. The Renaissance, which is the rebirth of knowledge, and the age of exploration leads to a Western world full of philosophical ideas. Those most important to this video being Christian men who decided for themselves what God meant, and they had the technologies to spread their ideas to new lands. One, they had the printing press. That was newly invented around Martin Luther's time. And they had boats that they were able to circumnavigate the globe with. So that's what I mean by that. Religious splits, humanism, and enlightenment. Humanism. Originally, it is the belief that God gave man the free will to solve the world's problems through exploring and experimentation. God, therefore, was answering prayers by providing the free will to seek knowledge. Most Protestant Christian denominations believe that not only did God give them free will to improve their circumstances, but by doing so, God is showing them that He favored them by them being successful. Sorry for the wording here, y'all. I wrote this a bunch of times, and it's just a lot of stuff. When you combine these two basic concepts, the result is capitalism, enlightenment, and self-governance. However, it was not that easy because Catholicism and Islam still had power over most of the world besides China and India and their respective territories. Protestantism and Catholicism spread an ideological warfare that would eventually lead to the founding of the United States of America. The English Civil War and Classical Liberalism. Classical liberalism is the child of both the Renaissance and Protestantism. The father, humanism; the mother, capitalism. I say this because Catholicism discouraged the lending of money and the creation of personal wealth for the common man. Capitalism is the opposite. Without that influence and the concept, success being godly, and humans should be free and equal, then theory of natural right would not have been defined as been given by God. The English Civil War was the culmination of Henry VIII's separation from the Catholic Church for the Anglican Church and many Protestant denominations after. Though Henry had been long dead, the English Civil War was due in part to the British people being fed up with the monarchy. And during this time, John Locke would continue to develop the humanist ideas of God-given human rights. All the while, his almost contemporary Thomas Hobbes, and many philosophers, including Locke and sociologists moving forward, would argue for the defining of what the perfect social contract was. This later also included Karl Marx. Classical liberalism versus modern liberalism. If you are an American and either subscribe to being a Democrat or a Republican, you are a liberal. The first section of this video was to demonstrate if you have any of the beliefs that are fundamental to what America, the country, it is culturally or philosophically, you are a liberal by world standards. However, those who are extreme Republicans and extreme Democrats are likely racists and sexist as a course of equity. Why? Because you believe in excluding people based on their race, gender, or sexuality for your personal advantage. Let me explain. In 1964, the 14th Amendment was signed into law. The 14th Amendment had been used in numerous landmark cases to address issues like racial segregation, gender discrimination, and other forms of unequal treatment. This act is the culmination of the promise of equal rights under the law, and it is what our founding fathers, John Locke, and the classical liberal ideology promised. It is now up to the people to maintain those equal rights by pressing our representatives, the courts, and to challenge any law that tips the scales towards any advantage based on the natural born characteristics. That being said, the law has been in effect for 51 years now. So for 51 years, the promise of equal rights has not been made. Because when you make a law saying that someone should be allowed to have a job because of their race, you're being racist. I laugh because we've been accepting this for so long. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that people think that being racist is a way to end racism. I am a classical liberal for many years. I am an idealist. I believe in equal rights, equal opportunity, equal representation, and equal treatment under the law, and that government should not stand in the way of those rights. I believe those things because I was raised in a Protestant home. My father served in the military, was a government employee, and I was surrounded by people who believed in the promise of America. I believe it is worth fighting for those classical liberal ideals. I do not believe government is perfect, nor is our economic or social system. I think the equality of opportunity is lacking because of access of education that makes one marketable and nepotism of economic class. This leaves people out of opportunities for socio-cultural reasons as well. Many of my beliefs were also instilled by popular culture, mainly television, books, and films of the past. So you can say Hollywood contributed to my liberal ideology too. Lastly, as someone who was born 12 years after the signing of the 14th Amendment, I know no one who is currently working today has ever known a day without equal protection under the law. Again, they have equal protection under the law, supposedly. Okay? But we just shifted. We shifted by, in order to give someone else equal rights, we took it away from someone else when it comes to opportunity based off of hiring practices. Modern liberalism is entrenched with the concept of social justice, a social concept that also can be traced back to classical and humanistic philosophy with similar directions as classical liberalism. Where it differs is the desire and outcome. Karl Marx, George Hegel, Kant, and Descartes all see social justice as more important to society than practical workings. Though I do agree with providing opportunity to all citizens to realize their potential, even economies where there are far less wealthy people and more proportionally distributed monetary systems create less wealth. What I'm saying here is you can redistribute all you want. There's always going to be rich people, and there's always going to be poor people, and there's always going to be people in the middle class. Okay? It's how they get there. Do they get there through nepotism? Do they get there because of their skin tone? Or do they get there because of the work they do or the education they get? I mean, we're not supposed to be discriminating against people. Wealth, even in a communist state, is distributed among class. Rich equals power. Ability equals influence. And unskilled equals the poorest people. So who is justice for? The working class? Women? Women are the demographic population majority. Or people who identify as non-white. The majority of poor in the USA identify as white. Justice in this multicultural nation, equal opportunity through education, merit-based work promotion, and low-cost but good legal representation. This is where equality lay beyond general civil rights. The first president to run for office under the Democratic ticket was Andrew Jackson. Jackson was a populist, meaning he ran as someone concerned about the average white American. His populist idea of removing Native Americans to the western territories of the country was his. We call that the Trail of Tears, for many good reasons. The famous contemporary of Jackson, David Crockett, or Davy Crockett, moved to Texas rather than participate in the Indian removal. During the United States Civil War, Democrats claimed to be for states' rights. After the Civil War, the Democratic Party in the South enacted Jim Crow laws and created the Ku Klux Klan to intimidate and punish black Southerners to keep them in line. At the same time, in the northern states, Democrats lobbied and protested for organized labor. Yes, you needed organized labor so that people would have rights to make a living. This is true. But it went from there to having basically a clique of people joining together to get paid more than above the average for their skill level. It's a simple fact. Okay? So this is not a majority thing. It's about minority grievances of people wanting to make money for themselves. It has nothing to do with equality. That's the Democratic Party. Once the Democratic Party realized they could no longer get support from Southern whites, they switched to racial minorities and women. The only constant in the Democratic Party's agenda is their lack of support of classical liberal ideologies over popular politics of the aggrieved. This leads me to logically believe the party is actually anti-American. I don't even like saying that, but I mean, if you don't hold for equality for all Americans, then you're not holding liberal ideology. You're just not. As I mentioned previously, I believe in the ideals in the United States Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. I do believe that all people are created equal and have the same rights. They must, however, find their talents so they can pursue happiness. I believe it is up to every country to guarantee the rights of their citizens, and our country be a model of the best an imperfect country can be. And it is my hope every citizen around the world will demand the same from their leaders. We cannot house the entire world in the United States. As a child, as mentioned before, I was raised to believe what I believe because of popular culture. The culture of film, television, and music. However, the majority of people in these cultural professions would not support my political beliefs. I have always found this to be strange. In my teens, 1991 to 1996, I decided I wanted to join a political party that represented my ideals. Though there was influence in my life towards both parties, I wanted to decide for myself. I have always been a fan of history, and I followed current events, including politics, since I was a small boy. I actually recall the 1980 election. I remember watching the results on the news. What I found was the Republican Party was created specifically as an abolitionist party, meaning they wanted to end slavery. That did not mean the party saw everyone as equals, but they did know by their interpretation of the founding documents and philosophies this was the classic liberal agenda. The Republicans were also the party that created more civil rights legislation and passed more laws and voted yes in higher ratios than Democrats to ensure those rights than any other party in the United States political history. Though when I registered on my 18th birthday in 1994, I registered as a Republican, I knew the party wasn't perfect, but their political philosophy aligned with classical liberalism as it does today. But I also aligned with other ideals that favored the wealthy regardless of merit. Why is this video so important right now? I believe it is important to make it known right now, in this day, in the current political climate, that people actually know the foundations of who they support politically, and to realize that subverting one group of American citizens over another is not only wrong, but goes against what the liberal West believes. Fighting for equality and the 14th Amendment guarantees is still not over, even in America. Right now, looking at the 14th Amendment, it is obvious we are not living up to the people's 14th Amendment rights. For 50 years, amendment rights are still being violated by every institution in American life today. Anyone who is hired or promoted based on their racial, gender, or sexual orientation means the people who were not chosen because they did not possess these genetic characteristics, their 14th Amendment rights have been violated. Like in 1964, it is time to truly right this injustice by challenging it or passing laws forbidding these human right violations from now on. Last thing. Do I or have I supported Donald Trump? I have supported Donald Trump since 2015, just like I have supported every Republican since 1994. Donald Trump's Republican Party, however, is the one I identify with the most in ideals, especially in concerns with classical liberalism. I support peace across the world. Peace and laws that are constitutional in this country, and I support an American first economic agenda. I would hope that every citizen in every country would support the same for their country. I do, however, have some complaints. I do not support political dynasties. I do not support only having the truly wealthy and entitled as believing they represent the majority of people, because they have too long been separated from them. As a native Floridian, in 2022, I was forced to leave a state my family has lived in since it was still a territory. I am grievously hurt because the wealthy that earn their money elsewhere price people like me out of my home. I am a school teacher. My wife is a school teacher. In Florida, I could never buy a home with what the state pays teachers. Even after vigorously working and pursuing my education for 30 years, I could never get the same opportunities I have in Texas. Still, in Florida. Still, I would go back to Florida in a second if I could, because it is my home. Now, Donald Trump wants to install his daughter-in-law in the U.S. Senate seat representing Florida. No, I don't approve. The future. In the video, I have laid out my political opinion and where that opinion came from. I have done that to encourage you to do the same. You must separate yourself from your emotion. You must separate yourself from selfishness. If you do, I hope you will recognize that equality only comes from treating everyone the same way you want to be treated. We don't do that much anymore. Recognize the path forward is for everyone to do as well as they can. This only happens if we stop demanding to be recognized by each other as aggrieved individuals. Instead, we collectively must recognize each other as a deserving of those certain inalienable and equal rights. Thank you. Please like and subscribe. Please like, share, thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. You can also find me on X and Twitch, The Man Closet, or search out Magi History. Thank you.